Hello, everyone, and welcome to the John Howard Society Pacific Region's Speaker Series for 2021. This is the first one of the year, and we're really glad that you're able to join us today. I'd like to acknowledge that the John Howard Society Pacific Region operates across the unceded and traditional territories of the Coast Salish people in British Columbia, as well as on the traditional lands of the Yukon First Nations in Yukon Territory. So today I'm joined by Eamon Dhaliwal, our Director of Programs in the Vancouver region, as well as Munir Velji, who is our in-house counsellor. And they're going to be here to speak to you about a pilot program that we are delivering right now. And we hope will be really valuable to both yourselves as well as your staff and teams that you work with. So just before I hand over to them, I'm going to remind everyone that with this platform, you're very welcome to submit any questions you have for either of the presenters in the right-hand box. Hi, Charlene. Hi from London, she's saying. So pop them in the right-hand box and we will aim to address as many of them as you can. In the background, I can support with technical issues as well as Pinar, who's watching. So if you have any troubles, submit a question there and we'll respond to you. And with that, I will hand over. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that I am calling from Vancouver, and I would like to give appreciation to be able to live, work, and play on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish First Nations. So today we are delighted for you to attend and learn more about understanding burnout in the workplace. We feel that this is a timely topic given this past year and want to share some techniques and resources in relation to this topic. So as Liz mentioned, Munir is our in-house counselor, and before I pass it on to him, I just wanted to spend some time and give you some context as to how this all came about for us. All right. So our in-house counselor is a pilot project that we started this year, and it started originally based on a funding proposal that was available from our WorkSafe BC. So that's our Workers' Compensation Board. And the proposal was to address health and safety in the workplace, recognizing mental health and wellness as a key focus. So as an OSH committee, we met and discussed what we can do with this initiative. What we decided was the grant wasn't necessarily meeting the needs of where we were at that point in time. And before we can even submit for this particular grant, we wanted to conduct a survey to gather information from our teams regarding mental health and wellness in the workplace to better position ourselves for this grant. So we decided to expand it beyond just our OSH committee and include different members of the agency and develop a cross-organizational committee that consisted of OSH representatives, program representatives, human resources, and communications. We began to develop a plan on what we called mental health focus groups, and these groups were going to be led by a third-party contractor and in hopes that they would be able to elicit information that staff members may not have wanted to share with their employer. And so this information in these groups were conducted. Sorry, I am just going to expand my screen. I can't see it all. So we first introduced all of the groups to the staff through an all staff event. And we wanted the individuals to be open to the conversation of mental health and wellness through hands-on activities in a safe and collaborative way. The objectives of this pilot project for the mental health focus groups were to uncover mental health challenges employees face in their role, provide frontline workers with a voice for being part of the solution, and to develop strategies that provide staff with support to improve their mental health. When creating these groups, we wanted to recognize that different employees have different experiences at work, And so we wanted to ensure that we facilitated sessions that were appropriate to those experiences. So we separated groups based on program types. So were they more residential-based programs? Were they more outreach, in-reach programs? And then also recognizing employment status had different experiences, where permanent staff might have had unique experiences that casual staff may not have witnessed, and or vice versa. This led to 10 mental health focus group sessions being facilitated for all of our staff. Everything that was shared in those groups remained anonymous from the leadership team. We only received a summary report afterwards with no identifying factors, and it was collated from all of the sessions, so we weren't even able to identify which session said what. And these reports were generated from questions and open dialogue about mental health in the workplace. So through this, a final summary and recommendations report was developed. In the final report, we received specific themes and feedback that arose during the focus groups. The recommendations continue to be regularly reviewed to ensure continuous improvement. One of the specific recommendations we received was specifically in relation to an in-house counselor. Individuals identified that our EFAP program, although sufficient, wasn't always meeting their needs because the counselors didn't always have an understanding of the work that the staff were participating in. So they wanted someone in-house and that could be subsidized. So that led us to explore different funding opportunities. And during the last year, lots of unique funding became available, specifically in relation to COVID-19. And so we were able to look into grant funding for staff wellness in 3 of our local communities. We applied for the funding to support the in-house counselor pilot project, and over time, it took us, I think, 3 or 4 times before we were finally approved in all 3 regions that we'd originally applied for. When then seeking for an in-house counselor, we wanted to make sure that we had someone who had firsthand understanding of the work of our staff teams, that also had experience with the various programs and systems our organization operates within, and then familiarity with EFAP and alternate support options outside of these services, just to allow for people to be connected beyond just what the program was for. And so in September 2020 of last year, we were able to finally launch our in-house counselor pilot project. We, through some different interviews and setups, we were able to find Munir, and we felt that he met what we were looking for in all the different ways, so much so that we didn't believe it could be true, but it was. And so we were able to then offer our teams short-term counseling sessions, so up to 4 sessions at no cost. And it was one-to-one solution-focused counseling using CBT principles. So it starts off with an initial 15-minute meeting within 48 hours of the individual reaching out to Munir. All of the sessions between Munir and the individual remain confidential. Munir is available through video conferencing, telephone, or in person, depending on the needs of the individual and what they're most comfortable with. We also recognize that we have a lot of 24/7 programming, so we wanted to make sure that whoever we had join our team was going to be available both through days, evenings, as well as weekends, and Munir has been able to meet that. So without further ado, I am going to pass it on to Munir to speak a little bit more about understanding burnout.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, so welcome everyone, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. Appreciate that. A little bit of background about myself. Yeah, I've been the in-house counselor at John Howard since September, as even mentioned, and it's been really, I found it really great in terms of being available, as well as just the variety of issues that have come up. I've just I think we've done well. We have, I think, so far seen 15 individual employees throughout sort of the region. So so far, I think it's gone quite well. Yeah, so my background, I am a social worker by background. I'm going to speak to you about burnout this morning and into the afternoon. A little bit about me. I've been a social worker for 28 years, mostly in clinical services. I work in the Downtown Eastside of Vancouver for an agency down there, and have been the practice and standards lead there for about 10 years. And prior to that, I've worked in residential services, health services. I've done a lot of work around youth probation, mental health, just kind of the whole general theme. I see we have people from London, Ontario. I've also been out to London many times, so that's great. And my daughter's actually at Western, so I know London a little bit. Anyway, so let's get started. A little bit of information from this presentation, and also hopefully a bit of reflection in terms of burnout. Burnout is, as we know, a real thing in social services as well. And so, we know that the high rate of job burnout in particular is really prevalent in social services, among other professions, but certainly this one as well. So in terms of our agenda, we're going to, we'll do a bit of a check-in for ourselves, talk about what burnout is, what it's caused by, a little bit about self-care and prevention techniques. We talk a lot about that. Sometimes we do more talking than we do actions around those things. So we'll certainly talk about that. And then a little bit of time to reflect on what we've learned and what we need to kind of focus on going forward. And then I'll just leave it with some resources and a bit of time at the end for questions. Okay, thank you for the chat. I see those now. Awesome. All right, so check-in. In terms of when we talk about pandemic, it's been about a year. Take a minute just to think about your own mental health and how it's been over the past 12 months. How was your mental health pre-pandemic, and how has it been? Well, we're not quite post, but since pandemic's been around and continues to be around, we're kind of focusing on what your mental health has looked like. I know that for a lot of people, it's been exhaustion. It's been certainly trouble with things like sleep and appetite. Some people have certainly felt anxious, fearful, certainly level of depression. So there's lots of different things, that have sort of happened over the 12 months. So yeah, give it a couple of minutes to think about that. And then the next question is just, are you seeking enough support and engaging in self-care? So, we know that with burnout, the more we seek support, whether that is professional support or whether that is, support through colleagues, friends, family, wherever it might be, as long as we're getting some support, that can kind of balance out sort of the level of burnout that might be occurring. So giving some thought in terms of that, and whether that is something that you need to focus on going on. All right, so what is burnout? It's a state of emotional and physical exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. So we know that one of the things that's come out, most recently in research is a lot around cumulative stress and the amount of stress that kind of builds up over time. And so if we think of something like the pandemic, which is sort of that hopefully one in a lifetime thing, we know that there's been prolonged stress and there's been excessive stress. And so, adding that adds to sort of the already stress that you might be feeling in the workplace, in your personal lives, wherever it might be, and it accumulates over time. And the less we deal with it, or the more we try and not actually address it, the more stressed we're going to become long term. We also know that burnout actually affects us emotionally as well as physically. So we know that people sometimes feel depressed, sometimes feel anxious on the emotional side, but they also might feel just physically exhausted. And so, feeling tired all the time. Sometimes people have all sorts of aches and pains that they don't usually have. Those are all signs of physical exhaustion or burnout. And we know that both of them generally come together. For the most part, burnout is not actually caused by a chemical imbalance or something to do with our neurotransmitters in our brain. Generally speaking, it is situational. So generally, when we look at a situation, should it be work stress, personal stress, might be both. Again, it could be external things like COVID-19. Long-term exhaustion and diminished interest, so depersonalization. So we know that when people depersonalize the work or depersonalize the situation, that's often a real sign of burnout as well as cynicism or negativity can also add to that as well. So a difference between stress and burnout, and they are really two different things. So if you look at stress, it's really characterized by overengagement. So if that's in the workplace, we're overengaged, we might be working extra overtime, we might be working more than we usually do, or we might be just overly engaged with clients or residents or whoever you might be working with. Burnout, for the most part, is actually characterized by disengagement. So this is where people might miss work, or even when they're at work, they're really not engaged with the people they're working with. The emotions and stress are usually overreactive with stress, and so we overreact to many different situations, while emotions and burnout are usually blunted and almost not really feeling a lot. When we think of stress, it produces urgency and hyperactivity a lot of times, and that's because of the irritation of our central nervous system when we talk about that, which is your spine up to your brain, and often we're feeling some sense of urgency and hyperactivity. With burnout, usually people are feeling pretty helpless or hopeless in the situation that they're in. With stress, often a loss of energy. With burnout, loss of motivation, ideals, hope. And so that hope thing again, and the hope is often directed towards sort of feeling hopelessness about the situation changing. Stress can often lead to anxiety disorders, and we have a number of them, things like OCD and generalized anxiety. We know that post-traumatic stress disorder, those are all anxiety disorders that, among others. And for burnout, most of the time it's detachment and in some cases depression. And again, we don't often see long-term depression if people address sort of the burnout and start working on sort of a wellness plan. With stress, we know that primary damage is physical, so we know that high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, a lot of things. Causal effect of stress is big in those things. In some cases, primarily causing. Primary damage is also emotional when we talk about burnout as well. So warning signs of burnout, things to pay attention to. If you're having depleted physical energy and it's not related to anything else like a medical condition, but you feel just physically not energized in a situation, if you're feeling emotionally exhausted, definitely lowered immunity to illness. So we know that when we're feeling burnt out, chances of being sick are higher, and we know that biologically our immunity to many different colds and all those types of things is lowered in those situations. Less investment in interpersonal relationships. So a lot of times we'll see people socially isolate, not just because of COVID, but in terms of their interpersonal relationships at work, but also outside of work. And we'll sometimes see breakdowns in relationships or people just isolating in all parts of their lives. Increasingly pessimistic outlook on life or real negative slant to it as well. Again, increased absenteeism and inefficiency at work. So we'll see lower production. We'll see some people calling in sick a lot more. It's a sure sign that if you're a person who hasn't called in sick usually, and you're finding yourself doing that a lot more, that's usually related to burnout as well. High sense of irritability, so that might be in your personal life or in your work life. And we know that for the most part, when we talk about burnout, it doesn't just happen at work. Like, we're not having these warning signs just at work. They're usually also very prevalent and present in our personal lives as well. Emotions for the most part are blunted. Again, back to that feeling of really feeling helpless in a situation. Nothing you can do can change it in your mind, or feeling really hopeless in that situation as well. Lessened motivation and drive, ideals and hope, and sometimes even in terms of goal setting or future orientation, a lot of times when we're feeling burnt out, we don't have a lot of that, those feelings or that even the energy to goal set, that type of thing. So what is burnout caused by? When we talk about perception, certainly pessimism, excitability, having expectations that aren't met. Certainly if you're a type A personality or a perfectionist, a lot of times we set up pretty high expectations, and when we don't meet them or regularly don't meet them, that becomes a sort of a recipe for burnout as well. Certainly when we look at our environment, so if we're not, if we don't have enough help or support, whether that's in the workplace or even outside of that, whether that's emotional support, but even just support in general. If we're not taking any time off, and one thing we've seen with the pandemic is people not taking their vacations because they're not going anywhere. So there's no need for that, but there is a need. There is a need to actually have time off from work, and it's an actual important thing. Too much work. So if your workload seems really heavy, both at home and at work, or if we don't have a good balance of that, that can certainly play into that as well. And too little sleep. And we know that when people are sleeping less than 7 hours for the average adult, that's too little sleep. So we want to have 7 to 9 hours for the most part on average in terms of sleep. And I know that, I don't know if there's people doing overnights here, but if you're a person who does overnights, that becomes really a big challenge to try and regulate your sleep, because you're actually going completely against your circadian rhythm of sleep. And I used to work nights for about 5 years, and I know exactly how that goes. So yeah, most of the time you're not getting enough, that's for sure. You may be on the road to burnout if every day starts to be a bad day, so you don't have very many good days. And again, even if in the past you've had a lot of good days at work, but even in general in your life, and you're just having really a bad day, and every day starts kind of that way from the negative slant, you could likely be on the road to that. Caring about your work or home life seems like a total waste of energy, or feels, again, hopeless. That's going to be for sure a sign. If you're exhausted all the time, so say you've had, I don't know, 3 days off, and like we did in BC, I think family days everywhere, I'm not sure. None in the Yukon, I heard. But if you're exhausted all the time and you've just had 3 days off, or you're coming off days off and you're still feeling exhausted, that's often a sign that you're burning out as well. Or the majority of your day is spent on tasks you find either mind-numbing, dull, or overwhelming. And at the end of the day, you feel guilty because you haven't got to a number of things that you wanted to get to. That can also be a sign that you're headed that way. And then feel like nothing you do makes a difference or is appreciated. And that might be appreciation in your workplace. It might be even in your home life. But if we start feeling, and especially in social services, a lot of us do this because we feel we make a difference, we feel we help people. But if you start feeling you don't, chances are pretty good that that's the road we're kind of heading down. In terms of the later stage of burnout, if you have frequently disturbed sleep, again, when we look at sleep disturbance, we're looking at trouble with sleep onset, but also mid-sleep awakening, or if you're needing medication and that type of thing for sleep, that's usually a sign that you're kind of at the later stage as well. Or you frequently experience overreactions to difficulty. So if you're overreacting and you're not a person that typically does that, that's usually a sign as well. Irritability, which can sometimes look like either lashing out at people. Irritability can also be just being irritable even in your home life, just being short with people, short in general, or also just feeling kind of anxious or nervous or shaky all the time. That can certainly be signs of that as well. You find yourself having a less reliable memory. If you're always forgetting things and you're a person who remembers most things, that's going to be a sign as well. And then you're starting to see, physical symptoms, as I mentioned, tension, headaches, which are usually in the front of your brain, front of your head, muscle pain. So, shoulder, neck is where we see it the most, and back as well. Or again, lowered immune system, and you find that you're basically catching everything that's around. That's going to be a sign as well that you're sort of at the later stage. So what do we do about it? We got to do something, right? So there are some things in terms of self-care and burnout prevention techniques that we can certainly do. And so first thing to ask yourself is, what are some barriers to self-care for yourself? And, certainly unhelpful self-talk. So, if you're thinking about self-care and you're going, well, it won't make a difference anyway, or I don't deserve it, or I don't have time for it, or it's a waste of time, or it's never helped, any of those sort of negative self-talk things are gonna be a barrier to getting on a self-care plan or self-care regime of some sort as well. I'm too busy. I hear that a lot. A lot of times we are too busy until our bodies tell us we have no choice but to care for ourselves. So, the too busy thing, I understand everyone has busy schedules, but really self-care can be 5 to 10 minutes a day, and we'll talk a bit more about that. Putting other people's needs over your own, believing that other tasks come before self-care, often is the things that sort of stand in the way. So really trying to prioritize it. I actually put self-care, whatever it's going to look like, in my schedule. And so I make sure that, even if it's half an hour or, I try and do about an hour, but even if it's, 15 minutes, it's better than nothing. So really starting to kind of schedule it or make it part of your routine can be a really important thing to do as well. The necessity to continue working. So, unrealistic deadlines, sometimes it's external to us, but certainly if we're perfectionistic, or we're unable to delegate or create boundaries, all of us that work in social services, me included, sometimes really struggle with boundaries. And so really important to set boundaries between work and home life, but also to create boundaries at work. So sometimes it's things that, if you can delegate or get support in or ask for support, I would encourage that in every which way, that you can. So when we talk about self-care, and we talk about self-care all the time, we talk to clients about self-care in general. So really we want to try and create a balance. And when we look at balance, we're looking at our physical self, our emotional or psychological self, and then our spiritual self as well. So we want to focus on creating balance, but we also want to set limits as much as we can. Sometimes you work, you have home life, and then maybe you volunteer or you have more than one job. Sometimes we have to set some limits around that as well. We want to practice healthy habits as much as possible. And so we know that things like exercise is a huge thing. And I'm not asking you to run a marathon, but just exercise such as going for a walk 3 times a week, or I don't know, going on a bike 3 times a week, or whatever it might be. Well, at least I'm in Vancouver, you can still do that. But if it's too cold, maybe not. But whatever it might be, just practicing healthy habits and really starting to move our body, because we know that when we exercise, we increase serotonin, which is serotonin and dopamine, which are sort of feel-good chemicals in our brain. But we also really cap that central nervous system where irritability often sits. Some people do, meditation, breathing exercises. Some people do yoga. I did yoga once, just about killed me. But if it's your thing, it was really hot in there. That's all I have to say. But if it's your thing, go for it. I can't tell if people laugh on this, so I'm going to assume you did. Fostering connection with others as well is really important. So, staying connected, even though we're in a pandemic and we're asked to, kind of isolate to a certain extent, but doesn't mean we can't connect via Zoom, doesn't mean we can't connect, by telephone, but it does mean more reaching out. And it's actually a really important thing as part of a self-care plan. And I've talked about the self-care plan. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It can just really just be routine, what you do in a given week in terms of self-care, and focusing on, again, all those sort of spheres, right? So again, the emotional and the physical and the spiritual. So making sure, and spiritual, if you're religious, that might be your thing. But there's a lot of things we can do from a spiritual sense as well, such as listening to music, going out in nature, whatever it might be as well. And then nurturing activities, having actually downtime. And there's something called a daily vacation. So, maybe taking 15 minutes to half an hour to relax, play, have some comfort, whatever it might be, Netflix, whatever works for you is important. And then being gentle on yourself, right? You're giving yourself a break. As humans, we're not really good about that. If you think of, even if you've written a paper or done an exam or something lately, we always focus on the ones we get wrong. But really, focus on what you did, what you got right, and be gentle on yourself. We're not always at 100% or at our optimum level. So also focusing on that as well. Escape, really important. I know that vacations are a little bit difficult right now, but having activities that allow you to forget about work, whether that's fantasy, whether that's away from like painful feelings, whether that's just taking some time to be by yourself, whether that's I don't know, like I said, anything that's an escape can be really, really helpful. We all need that as well. So ice fishing, right? I've never done that. Can't say I've done that, but hey, it sounds like it'd be fun. Make sure that ice is thick enough, right? It's one thing I do know. All right. Yeah, so if that's what works for you, go for it. Yeah, you can't do that here. You'd sink. But other places, I'm sure that's great. That's one thing. The outdoor ice rinks as well in the East are awesome. Okay, so what if you can't motivate yourself to engage in self-care? So we know that people procrastinate most when they're in a bad mood. So doing something enjoyable before a difficult task, eating a treat, going for a walk, phoning a friend, all those things to improve your mood is really, really important, because that's what motivates us. When we're in a good mood or it's a sunny day, those are things that are going to help with our mood, our moods as well. It might be warmer in places like Vancouver, but the clouds are like at my shoulder length most of the winter, so it can get a little depressing when all you see is clouds. But we do have the odd hot, well, not hot, but sunny day anyway. Reward yourself for engaging in self-care. So a nap, a hot bath, if that's what you're into. Not too much takeout, but some engaging in self-care. So it's almost like, you double up on your self-care as well. And we know that people are way more motivated if they have rewards at the end of it. And if the reward is, that you're going to feel better and that works for you, that's great too. And then, of course, setting up a support system. And so, again, sometimes it's great to do self-care with a support system, but it's also great to have people around you that support you. But if you can make yourself accountable based on your support system, that can also be really helpful. So having a check-in or having someone you're doing it with can be really, really good. So in terms of sustaining ourselves, so if you look on your right-hand side or my right-hand side, work-life stressors, we have family demands, those don't go away. And when you think of the pandemic, one of the things that people often talk about is that the other stressors are still there, right? So patient needs are still there. That hasn't changed because there's a pandemic. It doesn't. In fact, it's probably higher than it's ever been. Family demands are higher than they've ever been. If you have kids if you have kids going to school from home, that's going to increase the demands on your time. So there's lots of different things in terms of work-life stressors. Certainly perfectionism, overworking, we've talked about that, and absolutely, what your workload, client load looks like. Has that changed? Do you have more? Do you have? Is it staying the same, but the acuity is higher? Looking at all those kinds of things. Numbers are not always indicative, but certainly, what the issues are can be. So in terms of positive coping, we want to pay attention to health issues. So whether they are physical health issues that we're noticing or mental health issues, we want to put attention to that, and we want to make sure we get support with that, no matter what that may look like. And so that's our next point, which is just asking for help. You have an EFAP program, you have GPs, definitely out in Vancouver and Lower Mainland now we have the in-house counseling program. So there are different ways of asking for help. There's public services and private services. So absolutely make sure you reach out as well. Making sure you have relaxation time, as we mentioned, and also, again, positive relationships, not just at work, but also outside the workplace. And again, if we can keep the positive coping in balance with our work-life stressors, we're going to do much better from a mental health standpoint, and from burnout, we're going to reduce our likelihood of burning out. Again, sometimes, some weeks are going to be worse than others. Sometimes it tips over on one end, but the important thing is to recognize that it's tipping and to make sure we implement as many positive coping skills, resources that we can in that situation. So sustaining ourselves, so we want to be deliberate about a number of these things. So, slowing down, making sure we're evaluating our work-life balance. That can get out of balance really quickly. I can speak for myself. There have been times, certainly in my career, that I've been burnt out, or I know I'm heading towards it. And most of the time, I can identify that work-life balance as being part of the issue. Again, getting support, making sure you're not isolating, making sure you have a support system, but not just having that support system, but also making sure we connect with that support system. Sometimes we know we have it, but we don't connect with it. Setting boundaries, again, communicate your needs and delegate tasks as much as possible. If you feel, you're overworked, overwhelmed, setting your boundaries is important. Disconnect. So that is actually two things. Take deliberate breaks. Make sure you take your breaks. And make sure you disconnect from work, but also make sure you disconnect from the news and from iPads and iPhones and all those kind of devices, because we know that we're spending hours, and I think we all get reports on that every week, and that tells you how many hours you've been on it. And I'm always shocked by how many hours. So making sure you have some time to disconnect as well. Connecting with a spiritual you, again, journaling, meditating. If you're a religious person, certainly connecting with that as well. Making sure of that as well. Being conscious about warning signs. So everyone has warning signs of burnout, making sure you know, if you're really tired all the time, or you're feeling unmotivated at work, you're calling in sick a lot, you're having lots of aches and pains, you know, physically you're feeling it as well. Make sure we pay attention to that and not just sort of blow it off. And then addressing our lifestyle. So, you know, eating as healthy as possible. We talked about exercise, really important. And then having motivation buddies or people that we can connect with, you know, socially distance, go for walks, you know, whether it's sports or music or whatever it might be. Sometimes, you know, just connecting with other people can be important. I have a friend who's doing a pub night. He does a pub night every Thursday. So everyone, no, it's all virtual. So everyone gets on Zoom. It is actually a little bit entertaining because some people get quite drunk, but I attend every so often just to watch because it's kind of interesting. But he's got like 90 people attending now, so it's pretty good actually, and people feel very supported and feel like there's some normalcy there. You know, taking advantage of your EAP. You know, EAP basically for most companies is under about 5% utilization. So it's definitely something that you can access. Certainly in the Pacific region, you can certainly access me. And, you know, I'm certainly available for support as well. So in terms of just a couple of things we're going to just end on, which is just some reflection. So when you're thinking of colleagues and people you work with, what do you think would be helpful? So, you know, what are helpful things that your colleagues can do to support you? Thinking about that, reaching out as well to colleagues if that's what you're needing. And as a colleague, how can you be more supportive? Thinking about that as well. But also thinking about what are unhelpful things, I should say, for a listener to do. You know, what are things that are not helpful? And most of the time, most people say, you know, judgment is a big one for sure. Or when people are really distracted, they're not really listening to you, but they're on their phone or doing other things at the same time. That's usually pretty unhelpful as well. So focusing on what is helpful, what isn't, and what you need as well. And then again, you know, how do you make time and space in your workday to receive and give support? Sometimes it's on your break. Sometimes, you know, some teams set up, you know, like regular staff meetings or regular debrief time. If you're having that, that's great. Those are things we should be doing. It's really hard in a workday though, because I know you have so many other demands, but really thinking about how could we find some time and again, space for that as well. And then how do you ask for support when you need it? Is also another one. Not everyone's comfortable doing that. You know, obviously trust is a big thing. Feeling comfortable. Those are all things that come into it. But, you know, really sort of looking at how that can be for you as well. Debriefing, really, really important thing. And I know that in our sector, a lot of times debriefing is not available or we don't have enough time to do it, but it really is an important thing. And so whether you have shift change or you have time at the beginning of a shift or end of a shift or in the middle of a shift, debriefing is actually really important. And we know that our research tells us that when people are able to debrief in their workplace, their emotional health is, you know, much improved. So there's a number of different types. So there's an emotional debriefing. So again, just allowing for venting of thoughts and feelings. Really, you're just providing empathy or support. Don't always have to have the answers to those things. Problem solving. So sometimes it's about a certain client, sometimes a certain situation. You know, sometimes it's operational in terms of, you know, right now I know, you know, a lot of screening and how do we screen for people, and, you know, it's falling a lot on obviously all of you. So, you know, how do we problem solve that? How do we make sure we have, the resources to do things like that as well? Prevention debriefing. So, you know, checking in to see how how colleagues are doing. You know, checking in with people, seeing how they're doing, offering support. That's really important actually as well. Anybody who's in a supervisory position, you know, that's important to check in with your teams as well. And then closure debriefing. So, you know, identifying positive experiences from any event, you know, getting people to summarize it. If there's been a critical incident, it's really important to have all of these available and to do critical incident stress management. I know we have teams, at least I know in Pacific, I'm sure probably across the country, but just having that available is actually really important. And we know that debriefing can really help with stress reactions and burnout as well. So, and then, you know, sort of strategies for success, just again, reflecting on what can each of you do, right? And so, Sometimes it means reframing your expectations and your work. That maybe this isn't, I expected this, but maybe this is exactly what it is, and this is what I can expect. Sometimes when we're unclear about policy, or whether it's the mission or whatever it might be, asking for help and clarification is always important, whether that's with your colleagues or whether that's with supervisors, managers, that type of thing as well. And of course, supporting each other to receive help. Reminding people of resources. People forget sometimes that they have an EFAP. So you see somebody, struggling, you certainly can remind them of that. And then again, regaining a vision for your role and work. And sometimes it's a matter of sort of restructuring kind of how you think of a job or how you think of your life or your role. And that can be important as well. And sometimes it's needed because we think it's one thing and it turns out to be another. And then again, rewards of your work and how do we feel rewarded is a big one. So really focusing on have you developed, what have you how have you grown, changed in positive ways? Have you been to a few workshops that have helped? Have you been has there been some in-service stuff that's been helpful? And so focusing on those things and what have been some changes as a result. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, being mindful of your own stress. I just saw that in the chat. What have you learned? What is what has moved you? What have been things that are significant and important? And a lot of times, sometimes a lot of times for me, anyways, it's working with people, and when you see a difference in people, or they've made a positive change, or something has changed in their lives that you've had a part in, can be really important as well. And then the next question, how have you made a difference to others? Always an important thing to also focus on. And what are successes maybe that you and your clients have shared? We sometimes forget that or take that for granted. Laughing and humor, really important. So what has made you laugh? What makes you laugh? Making sure you have moments to laugh. One thing I've noticed, certainly with the pandemic, is people they don't laugh at me as much, and I think some would say I don't have a good sense of humor, but I think it's because of the pandemic. But whatever it is, thinking about what has made you laugh is really important, and focusing on that as well. We know that humor has a lot to do with our mental health as well, and laughing as well triggers many parts of our brain that are important. So Mother Teresa, good friend of mine, keep the lamp burning. We have to put oil in it. So remember that when you're thinking about yourself, if you're not putting oil in it, or you're not focusing on your self-care or yourself, it's really hard to keep going, right? So making sure we focus on that as well. Some resources and coping techniques, just to kind of end this a little bit. So, there are a lot of self-care apps. Headspace, Calm, Shine, Breathing Zone are all self-care apps. They have meditation, breathing. Actually, I just discovered Oprah has a really good app as well around meditation, if that's something you're interested in. In terms of websites, Anxiety Canada is a great website. Check it out. They have lots of tools on there as well. Psychology Today. In terms of Pacific, if you're from there, you can always access me. That's my number. You can text me, call me anytime, and we will, before midnight, and we'll set up a time for sure. And then EFAP, Employee Family Assistance Programs, are available to you as well. So a number of different things. And that's kind of it for my part of it. Thank you for all listening and attending. Was there any questions at all? You can use the chat if anybody has any questions. I like the comment about being mindful of your own stress. It's really important if you're going to be helping others, for sure. The healthier we are, the more we can help the clients that we work with, for sure. And in terms of, there is a, as you see, I think it's downloading. If you want to do the burnout scale, it does give you an idea where you're at. The higher your number, the more you're heading towards burnout. So if that's happening, make sure you reach out for supports and that type of thing. But it's a simple scale that you can do on your own, and certainly don't have to share with me. But you can download it if you see it on your screen as well.
Thanks so much, Munir.
Thanks.
That was so helpful and insightful. Thank you. We still have a couple of minutes. If anyone has any specific questions that they want to pose to Munir, they can pop them in the chat box. And most of you should be able to see this PDF that's up on the screen that you can download and share with anyone you might work with, or take the time to look at yourself.
Yeah, happy to
so,
answer any questions at all.
We have a question come through from Salma. Munir, if you click back to the chat kind of window, you can see that.
Sure. Okay. Oh yeah, there we go. Oh, there we go. Yeah. Okay. Your question. Okay. Oh, and there's a question about the apps. Most of them are free. Most of the ones that I have there are free. Yeah. So when you feel burned out, you start to do self-care. How long is the average time in interval? We'll get back to. Oh, okay. Great question. Excellent question, actually. So yeah, it all depends. It depends on how much self-care you do. It also depends on where you are in terms of burnout. But you should start feeling definitely a bit better. You know, if you start to do a self-care plan, especially if you're focused on, again, when we talk about self-care, focused on that physical aspect, emotional aspect, and spiritual aspect. If you're hitting all of those, you should start to see some improvement anywhere from 7 to 14 days after you start. So by the 2-week mark, you should be feeling quite a bit better than you did when before you started your self-care plan. And you should start to see some changes sort of by about 7 days. So 7 to 14 days, essentially, week to 2 weeks. Oh, there you go. If you have TELUS, thank you. I haven't. Yeah, you can bank points. Great. Does that answer? Yes, Selma? Okay, perfect.
Maddie was saying that if you have a TELUS account, I guess and the app, that you can bank points to get access to either the Calm app or the Headspace app for free for a couple of months, so you can give it a try. And I think a lot of them have free trials at the start as well. Thank you.
They do. And the websites, I really highly recommend Anxiety Canada, because it's, first of all, they have a ton of tools that you can use, and those are free because I use them all the time. So that one I can tell you.
So if anyone had to leave the session halfway through, or they want to share it with somebody else, what we do is we do record the session, and then we upload it onto our website, which is jhspacific.ca. So at any point in the future, if you want to come back and kind of re-listen to Munir's wise words, or share them with anyone else, that's where it'll be. So give us a couple of days for us to be able to kind of upload it onto that, and it'll be there shortly. We'll also send the link out to everyone who's attended. So.
Yeah, right. No, I was just another point that was made in the chat. You know, really, if one thing we know about burnout is, and someone made the point about taking a break from work, we know that burnout does not go away if we just take a break from work, or even if we leave a job. Actually, a lot of times when we start another job, it just sort of returns. So it's really important to get that support, make behavior changes, make sure we're taking care of self-care at the same time. Those are all important things, because we know it doesn't just go away without also being active in those realms as well. So thank you for that as well.
I really appreciated your suggestion of scheduling in your self-care time. So important. It's so easy to let the day get away with us, but making sure that time is specific and intentional to be able to relax and recharge. Important.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just a question here too about the pilot project. My understanding, and Eamon, please jump in if I'm mistaken, but as far as I know, it's Vancouver, Surrey, and Abbotsford that have access at this point.
Correct. We were only able to acquire funding in very specific regions, but we do encourage other John Howards to look at the COVID funding that's been released, and just any funding in terms of employee wellness is the umbrella that we were able to slot it under. And so we would encourage you guys to do the same and hopefully have success in that.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Oh, anyone have any more questions?
Great.
If you think of any later on, you can feel free to get in touch with us. Our contact details are on the website. Really glad that it's been useful to lots of people, and I'm sure as more people get the chance to see it up on the website too, there's so many great pieces of advice.
Yeah. All right, great. Oh, and one last question here. Okay, see ya. Yeah, in terms of disconnecting from the workday, there's a question about that. Yeah, walks in the summer are great, but right now it's tough with some places for sure. Just taking your breaks are really important. But even just getting outside. I mean, if you can't go for a walk per se because of the weather, but even just getting some fresh air is really an important way. And the reason why that works is because you're actually taking a break from your workday. And one of the things that people do, especially in social services, in our area, is they don't take their breaks. So it's really important to take that break, get some fresh air, disconnect that way, do something totally different during, maybe read your book during your breaks, those types of things until the weather improves and you can actually go for walks. Walks are great though. That's glad you're doing that mostly in the summer. Spring's just around the corner. So they tell me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Munir, and thanks to everyone for able to attend.
You're very welcome.
We'll see you next
Thank
time.
you, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.